Budgeting, it isn't restriction, it's direction. You basically tell the energy where to flow. Remember, money is about flow, it's about currency, and you are the gravity that pulls that flow, right? When we think about, say, water, most abundant, the most beautiful, most powerful element there is, it represents life. Some people say money is life. And so what we need to start doing is we need to start redirecting, reframing how we look at money, how we deal with money. Because when we start to understand that we have a responsibility and that we have the power to be respectful with money and honor money by being intentional with it, is very important to do so. When you start doing that, then that's when money feels a sense of love from you, right? Feels a sense of safety with you. And when money feels safe with you, then money will flow back to you. You see? So today, what we're going to get into is some embodiment education. What I've come to understand about my journey when it comes to amassing money and really attracting money, putting myself in positions where money is easier, right? When it comes to flowing towards me, money is easier when it comes to maintaining it and growing it, is that I have to change my mindset and how I look at money. Because most of us, we only look at money as a means to either one, pay bills, or two, buy things that really don't increase in value and bring us even more of that abundance and prosperity in our lives. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go into all the different categories and we're going to shift our intention as to why and what we do when it comes to money in that particular category in life. Okay. So we're going to redefine budgeting, not as something that we are doing as, almost like a punishment, right? Or a restriction, but really as a means of spiritual alignment. That's the key here. This is a spiritual alignment practice. And so you have to start thinking about money differently in order for money to start actually relating with you differently. Okay. So we're going to talk about really replacing the expenses, right, with energy exchange. Okay. So I am going to be writing and I might be looking at my notes because I have a lot of information here. And this is not one of those, flow from consciousness kind of lectures or videos that I normally do. So I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. Okay. Because there's been plenty of times where I make my video with the thought that I'm going to go a particular direction. And then I just start downloading insight, information, and other things come out. Okay. And then when I go back and look at my notes, I missed a few things that I wanted to address. So today we're going to do something a little bit different, especially because we're talking about money. We're bridging the gap between the metaphysics of how you think about money, feel about money, but also practicality on what to do. So we're going to talk about practical, very, definite, but very clear categories of things and how you think about it. Okay. Real things. All right. So let's first start at income. So first, let's start with money, right? This is the category we're going to go into. But let's start with, right? Number one is income. Okay. This is about the flow of money coming to you. And so this is about the intention here is opening channels of abundance. Okay. You're simply not just earning, right? You are allowing a flow. So the thing with this is with income, we associate income with value of oneself. Okay. The trick is you have to understand that the action with income must be one of bless every inflow, right, as proof of alignment with your value. Now, your value is defined by you. Okay. And it is defined by you by how you identify. So if you identify with somebody who makes a low income, that's the reality you're going to create. So every job that you're going to go to are going to be low income jobs. You're not going to even be able to imagine or fathom being at a job that pays over a certain amount of income. So you have to essentially work on the identity here. Okay. So income is really about learning to receive with purpose. Okay. Purpose here is the most important word, always. That's the most important word to life. I think one of the most important words, I should say. The income you receive, if it is backed by purpose, then all these other things will take care of themselves. In other words, if you have a purpose behind the money you get, and that purpose is like really one of high level, right? Or increasing in your level and where you are and saying, you know what? All right now, I only work at such and such restaurant, fast food restaurant. I only make such and such amount. It's not a lot, right? But if I take this money and do, right, something with it for a purpose, then you start to begin to control the environment because now you have purpose. When people get jobs, they really don't have purpose, right? They just get the job because they feel like they have to get it just to pay bills, right? Just to survive. But we want to go beyond that. Purpose is beyond survival. Okay. So with your income, you want to understand this is about receiving with purpose. Okay. And that's predicated on your identity. All right. So this is how you need to think about income, right? This is the first step. We're going to go through about 10 of these, 10 different categories that we're going to break down. So this is category 1, income. That's where it all starts. Whatever you receive in will essentially determine, right, what else happens. You have to look at your income as a means of where you get this, it derives from the source, right? You get this source, right? We're talking about money. So when we talk about the source of money, the first thing is, what is your income? Then from there, what's going to happen is you're going to go and put this source into various other categories or buckets. Okay. Now, what we're doing here is we're taking one thing, right? Income, and we are expanding it. We are growing it. Okay. It's like a seed. This income is a seed. And whatever you do with this seed, when you plant it, when you water it, when you put it in the right environment, the roots are going to extend itself out. So when it comes to your income, you have to ask yourself, what are you doing with that root? What are you doing with that seed? Are you nourishing the seed? Are you planting the seed? The more you nourish and plant it, then these roots are going to grow, okay? And they're going to branch out. And then eventually the seed will start to grow and eventually become a tree, right? Which will also bear fruit. So that is the number one thing, income. Being intentional with your income, receive with purpose, okay? Now, number 2. These are all very important and things that you need to really like. Some of them are going to hit different, right, for you than others, and that's fine too, right? So this next one is savings. Now, I can tell you firsthand, I was never good at savings. My mindset was always learn how to make more money, right? Learn how to increase income. But savings can be a means by doing that, because when you save, then you have the wealth, right? You amass the abundance the currency to actually then go in and invest in something. You see? So savings is about storing energy. Okay. It's about storing energy for expansion. Remember, money is energy. So when you save your money, you're basically taking that energy, you're growing it, you're storing it. And then what you do with that money is you are intentionally, right, expanding it. You're putting it towards something. Okay. Now, whatever that is up to you. It can be all of the following categories that we're going to discuss. But ultimately, it's an intention to do something. So when you think of savings, simply think of storing energy for expansion. Okay. And that's essentially what we're doing here, is that we're looking at the traditional words and how they've been used, and we're changing the language here, because language is very important, especially when it comes to the subconscious mind. These words come with an association, right? They come with their own identity, especially when it comes from you. All right. So as you are changing your identity, it's important to change the identity of, say, said language, right? The language that you are using, right? If you're changing your identity, that identity speaks differently, thinks differently. So now we want to connect the dots between what we once used to consider just income, or what we once used to consider just savings. Now we are considering, say, income, receiving with purpose. Okay. Now savings, storing energy for expansion. So you see where we're going with this? It's about really understanding what these things, these categories really mean. Okay. On a metaphysical, spiritual level. When you start to get into what they really mean on that level, then it starts to create a shift in your relationship with it. You know, it's like when you're in a relationship with somebody and you're having a conversation with somebody, especially in the beginning, you have to learn that person's language, how they speak, how they refer to certain words, right? What those words means to them. Okay. Because then that allows you to have a true connection, a true level of understanding. So sometimes that means, though, you have to change your word. Okay. So if somebody let's say marriage, right? Marriage most often means something for me, different for me than it does for somebody else. This happens all the time. We assume that it means the same thing for everybody, but it doesn't, right? Until we get married and then people find out, wait a minute, no, if you're married, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what you're supposed to do, and da, 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 da. And then there's a big mess. So back to the money, same thing. It's about gaining clarity, because now you are creating a new intimate relationship with money. So now you have to understand, what does that mean for you on a spiritual, metaphysical sense? Okay. So savings, right, is about a goal. Okay. Say is something toward, what is your ultimate goal in life, right? Is it freedom, right? Financial freedom. Are you wanting to invest this money into something that's going to give you financial freedom? Is it an experience, right, or an adventure, right? So then you have to ask yourself, okay, so what am I saving for? Financial freedom. All right, this is my freedom fund. All right, this is my adventure fund. So having clarity on what you're saving for is very important. But ultimately here, we really want to focus on how we are labeling this, creating a new sense of language and resonance with you and your spiritual journey, and recognizing that money is, in fact, a spiritual tool. All right. So let's get into number 3. These are some things that are very important that I've come to change, as far as, thinking about, say, for example, savings. I was not one to save. And so I had to really understand, well, why am I saving? What's the point of saving? Because I kept hearing it. And when you start hearing something in the universe, often it's the universe really trying to talk to you, really trying to communicate to you. So you got to be mindful about paying attention, right? And not being so stubborn that you shut things off. So number 3 is investments. Okay. Now, you see how things kind of build on one another. We started at income, then we went to savings, and now savings to investing. You take that income, save it, and then you invest it, right? We're talking about money. So we're talking about using money to essentially grow more money. Okay. Very important. So investments is about very important to understand that these things build upon one another. Nothing happens in isolation. So you have to be very, clear about that, and so when you get good at one thing or, level 1 in a video game, then you go into level 2, right? You cannot jump to level 5 in the very beginning. So these things build on one another. Okay. So we're talking about planting conscious seeds. Okay. Now we talked about the seed before, right? The seed is the income. You take that income, you save it, and then you put it into different places, right? And those different places can represent roots, branches, what have you. And as you take that in money, right, and you invest it consciously, meaning that you are aware and mindful, right? You're intentional about this. Mm. You know also that these things require a level of patience, right? Require a level of trust and faith in oneself. And so you choose investments that match your vibration. Because a lot of times what people do is they'll hear about, some kind of money making idea that somebody else did. And that person will be so ecstatic and happy and excited and free. And so we want that. We identify with that. That's something we want to experience too. And so then we assume we're going to do what they did. Sometimes that works. Most times, many times it doesn't work. Why? Because it doesn't resonate with who you are. It doesn't match your vibration. It doesn't match your frequency, right? It doesn't match your education. It doesn't match your level or experience in business. It doesn't match maybe your health, you know, assets that basically they need to align with your overall mission. And that's the point here. So just like anything, money is a very important thing that it really matters where you are spiritually. You have to get into self-awareness in order for you to grow in any category that's important to you. So when it comes to your investments, always be conscious about the seeds you're planting. All right. Be mindful, be responsible. Okay. So when we think about investing, think about planting seeds. All right. And always recognize that when you plant the seed, get the basic education, metaphorically, the soil, the nutrients, the water, the environment. And then, of course, most importantly, the patience, right? No seeds grow overnight. They may take at least a few weeks, at least if we're talking about literal seeds. But, with anything else, you have to be patient in order, especially if it's something worthwhile. So let's get into number 4. Now, let's get into the bills, right? These are the things that people really don't want to talk about when it comes to money, right? They'll talk about it in terms of investments, but housing, right? House, apartment, your living situation, what does this really mean? So when we take our money and we're buying a house, we're paying a mortgage, we're paying rent on an apartment, what does this represent? What this represents, and when it dawned on me, I really had a very serious epiphany about it. It's because it's something that we often take for granted because it's the quote unquote highest expense, but it is your foundation of peace. Very important. Okay. This is why it's so quote unquote expensive. Peace is by far the most valuable experience one can have. It is the experience that we are all seeking to have in this spiritual journey. So when we think about your apartment, when you think about your house, your mortgage, really think about it in terms of when you are paying your mortgage payment, when you are paying your rent, right? I know you want to hold on to that money and it's a lot of money. And then you're like, well, I just got paid and now all my money is gone to rent, right? Understand what you are exchanging that money for is peace. Okay. When you recognize that your home should be and only be a place of peace, that also allows you to take ownership of your environment, right? Don't allow for chaos. Don't allow for drama. Don't allow for busyness, messiness, disorganization to happen. Okay. What you are supposed to create here is stability and basically a sacred space, right? You're supposed to create a sanctuary here. This is what this exchange is about. You're buying, renting, right? You're taking your money and putting it, directing that flow of energy toward your peace. You see, that's very important for you to understand. Okay, so you got to start treating your mortgage, right? Your rent as payments of energetic safety. We all want to stay and live in a place that is safe, right? That is silent, quiet, right? That aligns with that peace. We want safety, not just mere survival. And some people, I used to be one of them where I didn't care where I lived. My only exception to that was I don't care about the neighborhood. I just care about my apartment. So even if I was in the hood years ago when I lived in the Bronx or lived in New York, Brooklyn, Brownsville, it didn't matter to me the outside space, the neighborhood. What mattered to me is the actual apartment and the space that I cultivated and created. And the rent payments were actually to continue to have that. But sometimes you realize the outside space does matter, right? Because if there are fights outside, if there's loud parties or craziness going on, it's going to invade, right? It's going to interrupt your space, your domain. So a peaceful home, though, you have to understand is a space that expands your creativity. So when you're at a home or a space where you are safe, right? You are not just surviving, but you've cultivated a space where it's peaceful, it's happy, it's calm, then creativity can flow. You see? So recognize that though we identify this as the largest expense, it is the most important intention, the most important experience, right? So then it makes sense why it's expensive, right? So I'm using the word expensive. I don't want you to hold on to that word, obviously, but this is about bridging one conversation to another. So we often associate this, right, with an expense. But really, we are changing expense to experience, right? So we're thinking in terms of housing, apartment, highest expense. But really, we're taking our money and we're directing it toward the most important experience. Okay. This right here was like a boom explosion in my mind. I was like, okay, I see where this is going, you know, as far as these realizations and understandings as to how I need to shift how I look at my money and how I look at spending. Because if you're not at a place where you can identify or connect value to what you're spending and you feel like you're forced to do so, man, the relationship and the whole dynamic with money is going to be a hard one, especially when it comes to the quote unquote highest expense, right? Now let's get into number 5. 5 can be considered probably the most important expense because without it, the could you live, right? You can't live, right? So when we think about food, it's pretty easy to really understand the importance of food, right? Because essentially food is what we can say is fuel for frequency. Okay. Now, this frequency part is very important, but we can understand this connection. Food, fuel, great. But food can be a complicated thing because there are many kinds of food. But what I want you to understand is when you take your money and you direct it at food, what you should be doing is directing it at foods that align with the frequency that you desire to experience, right? That align with your future self frequency, as I mentioned in my book, The Future Self Frequency. So it is important to fuel yourself. And we can fuel our bodies with crazy, nasty, disgusting things. That's what's amazing about the body. But that doesn't mean if you can eat it, you should. So be mindful and intentional because the money it doesn't just stop at the food. The food is fuel. When you fuel something, you fuel it not just to fuel it, you fuel it to do something else. Okay. And so your body is a machine, right? So the food is fuel to get this machine going. Why? To do something, right? To fulfill something, to obtain something, to achieve something, to pursue something. But also the food each food that you eat has its own frequency. If you are eating high frequency foods, I recommend plant-based diet, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, therefore, and you are eating those foods that are alive, have a high frequency, they're going to help you to align with the frequency of your desire. They're going to help you move forward and propel you on that path to achieve that thing. But if you're eating crappy foods, you're going to feel like crap and you're not going to want to pursue that thing. You see? So food, very important. We can understand that. But focus on the quality of your food, right? Eat as healthy as you possibly can. This is not about being perfect. The journey of food gets complicated because we think that we are supposed to eat a perfect diet, like there is such a thing. I myself, I'm a vegan. I've been vegan for about 15 years now. And there are always still improvements in my diet. Eating more fruits and vegetables, raw fruits and vegetables, keeping my food as simple as possible, Sometimes I do have an Impossible Burger here and there, and I've been decreasing those processed vegan meats, and things of that nature. So it's a constant journey. And even if I got to a point of, say, you know, raw food veganism is like the highest level, right? But then even at that point, you can go further because are you growing your own fruits and vegetables? Chances are you're not. So then, okay, I can go work toward doing that as well. So this with food, the point is don't be complicated about it. Just do better every single day. Now, another expense, some people will say this is the second highest expense, right? Number 6. And I guess is relative, right? Depending on where you're living at, how you're living. But most people will say it's a car, right? Now, I'm from New York City originally, so most New Yorkers don't have cars, right? We rely on public transportation, the subway, which I miss dearly, even though it's crazy and disgusting, but that's just how I grew up. So I'm always entertained and intrigued and in love with that crazy culture. But what we paying for here, right? When it comes to transportation, when it comes to a car, right? We are basically directing the flow of energy, money toward movement with my favorite word, purpose. Money is helping you, right, to get to a place with purpose and with speed. Really, that's what we're paying for, right? Because you can walk anywhere, right? But in order for you to get to a place to get things done at a decent time frame and in alignment with society and your community or what have you, you want it to happen fast, right? You want it to happen relatively fast. So, but ultimately, when we pay for our car, when we make payments, when we direct that flow of money toward our car, what we're paying for is movement. We're paying for this ability to get somewhere fast to, again, get something done. Now, just like I said, all these things can be stacked upon one another, right? Because it all starts with the income, and then that income is dispersed out to all these different things. And they can begin to become complicated. Because now you're like, wait a minute, that one source of income, which it shouldn't be, it should be more than one source, but they're going out, that income is going out, they're being dispersed into different places. It's up to you to be strategic and mindful about that, right? So a car is the most expensive, right? It's going to pull from this source of money that you have. Now, if you have a good source and you have an abundance of money coming in, okay, then the car is not a big deal. You don't need a car. It can be, depending on where you are, it can be a moped, it can be a bike. Okay. It can be, when I was in New York, at one point, I had me a nice longboard, which is a long skateboard, and I would just cruise and go where I need to go. Right. And I was just kind of like transportation, but also enjoyment. So also think about it that way too. You can combine all these things when you are really in alignment, but it also depends on where you are, right? Some people who say live down south, like Florida, to go to work, it takes them at least 30 minutes, right? So you want to be mindful about all those things. So essentially with transportation, the money you're putting towards that is not just simply to have a car, just to have a car. We get caught up in that, and then we get caught up in the kind of car. That's silliness, right? And this is what I mean by having mindfulness and respect for this energy called money. If you are really focusing on paying for movement with purpose, right, speed, the kind of car doesn't matter. Even how fast that car goes doesn't matter because we're all going the same speed limit, right? So be mindful about that. Now, again, this comes into what do you find more important, right? Me, for example, if I have a job, right, when I, go see my hospice patients or what have you, I'm in my car all the time, right, going from patient to patient. So my time in my car is more than the average person. So I have to be intentional about the kind of car that I get because I'm 6 foot, you know. Sometimes I'm going for long runs when I do my fitness and my knees a little sore, my joints a little sore. And it's like getting up out of a short car is crazy for me. So I got to make sure my car is a certain height. Got to make sure the seats are a certain way, right? But that's pretty much it. So think about that with transportation. You are exchanging your money for movement with purpose and speed. All right, moving on. Let's go to number 7. Very, very, very important here. Number 7 kind of leans into food to me. Health and wellness. All right, one of my favorite topics. Health and wellness allows for you to essentially cultivate what we talked about before with your home, peace, but outside of your home, peace within oneself. Okay. But health and wellness is really about maintaining your vessel, or I would say your temple. Okay. You have to understand your body is actually your most important home. Okay. I talked about the house, the apartment, that being your most expensive experience. But this is your most important expense or experience. Okay. This doesn't require a lot of money, but it reaps the most reward and benefit. Always and never. Okay. Always put your money toward your health and wellness. Never be scared to put money toward your health and wellness. Okay. So here, what we're talking about is taking this energy of money and directing it to maintaining your vessel and your temple. You got to understand and the importance of budgeting for self-care, rest, renewal, right? These are all non-negotiable. Okay. We're talking about energy maintenance. Without the proper maintenance of your energy, right, you're not going to be able to do nothing. You're not going to be able to do anything. You're not going to be able to even be at a place where you can experience and be in love and with life and in love with another person and in love with everything that's happening in life and yourself. Those things are just not going to be at its optimal level if you're not focusing on your health and wellness. Okay. So this is about protecting your physical expression, right, of your consciousness. That's the intention here. Because if your vessel, if your temple isn't right, your consciousness that is housed within this temple, vessel, your body, is not going to be able to express itself out fully, right? You essentially will turn your body into a cage if your body isn't taken care of right. Okay, because then it's going to restrict you from the ability to do certain things when you're inspired to do so. Very, very important. Okay, so number 7, which is interesting, 7 is the number of divine intervention. Make sure you take care of and you put your money and energy toward your health and wellness. All right, let's move on to number 8. And 8 is classic, good old education. Education and growth. This isn't hard to understand and hard to see, right? Now, you see how these things can really influence or relate to one another. I just mentioned and we just talked about health and wellness. Well, you can focus your money toward education and growth in the topic of health and wellness. These things can go on top of and go inside of one another, right? They can be part of one another. So when you think of education and growth, really think about expanding awareness, because it's about to allocate energy into evolution. Okay. That's what this is about. This is like intentional, where you're saying, you know what? I have this income, I have this money, I have this currency, right? I have this energy that was given to me as a result of who I identify, recognizing that if I identify with growth and wanting to expand myself, who I am, gaining a better understanding of the truth of who I am, education is going to provide that for me, right? It's going to give me that growth. It's going to allow you to essentially evolve your ego, that identity. Okay. So you can come to an awareness of your absolute truth, right? So education, when we think of education, we're talking about an expansion of awareness. All right. Next one. 9. This one is interesting because it's very like, it's things that we all want to do, but don't feel like we have the means to. And we get locked into this place. See, that's the thing with being in survival mode, is that you're surviving. So you feel like you don't have enough for another, right? And so then you get into a space of greed, even a space of wanting to take from another, right? But the beauty of this is when you are on a spiritual journey, you recognize, when you're on a conscious journey, you recognize when you give to another, you actually do give to yourself. So this one is about contribution, or I should say giving and contribution. Now, really what we're talking about, right, is circulating abundance. Now, here's the thing, like I just said, everything is one. Okay. You are the center, the nucleus of your universe. So when you give to someone, okay, because though our ego separates, identifies, the reality is it is all centered around your perspective, your reality, right? Your identity. So even when you give to another, again, you are still giving to the universe which you live in. So when you give to others, okay, you essentially are giving to yourself, because the others are just simply projections, right? They're simply reflections of you. So when we think about giving, it's really a breakdown of the boundaries of what the ego has made up. Okay. So you prove to essentially trust an infinite source, or I should say infinite flow, recognizing that the flow always comes back, right? Just like when we think about water, it follows gravity. So it seems to go away from you, but eventually it evaporates, goes up into the sky, right? The cloud becomes clouds and the wind brings it back to where it once was. And then it rains. And then the water is back where it was and goes again through that cycle. This is how money works as well. Okay. So be mindful about that. So it's about, directing your funds to cause that reflection, right, of your higher self to essentially just recognize itself. You know what I mean? To recognize its own level of self through other people by like compassion, by way of compassion, right? When you are compassionate with somebody else, is like you are identifying with the divine within them, because the divine is within you too. You see? All right, let's finish this at 10, because we can't go on forever. But 10 is very important, right? Because one thing I think people do too often in the spiritual journey is that they take themselves too seriously, and there's no joy in them anymore. I mean, there's joy in them, but they're just not really living in the present moment. So joy and recreation, okay? Let's think of simple things. What would that be? Go to the movies, go for a walk, go for a vacation, you know, buy a book, right? Go to dinner, a special kind of dinner, get involved with some kind of sport. So really what we're doing here is putting our money toward honoring the present moment. This is absolutely important. Now, the thing is, to honor the present moment, you don't even have to put any money into it. You should be honoring the present moment every time. But when we put money towards, say, a trip, right? Say a dinner, say maybe even like a party, these are intentional, right? Toward a particular experience that you want to have. And usually the experience involves other people. So, you want to create a space where you can be present with the people you love or enjoy or want to get to know. And then you create a memory. You create an experience with that person, right? You connect with that person. So it's about intentionally creating experiences, moments, events of connection, right? That's what we're talking about when we get into using money for like joy and recreation. You see, it's about essentially recharging and celebrating, right? Life, celebrating creation, celebrating connection, celebrating each other, you know? So you budget joy consciously to, also prevent things like burnout, to expand what we talk about so much in spirituality, gratitude, right? I don't think I spelled that right, but you got what I mean, right? Gratitude, appreciation, like that's what we get. That's what we seek to have when we are in a place of joy and recreation, right? When we are building something or having a moment. So essentially, the intention here again is to shift how you see these things, not from a secular point of view of, oh God, gotta pay the bills. No. Yes, I'm happy, I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to pay and give energy toward my peace, toward, moving with purpose, right? Toward honoring the present moment and connections, building events of connection, right? So these are things that are absolutely important to consider because, in a way, unless you're off the grid, which some people do as well, because they don't want to get involved in playing this game of trying to figure out, how to shift their viewpoint on money or even just be a part of the system. They just want to just do something different. That's an option too, right? You have options here. You can participate in the game of money and the frequency of money, or you can just say, you know what? No, I'm not doing this. You have agency. You have the ability to shift and change according to whatever aligns with you. But budgeting ultimately isn't control. Okay. It's just simply conscious direction. So as you align with the future version of yourself that has money, right? That has created money, created multiple sources of income, that has mastered how to direct that income responsibly and in a way that allows more income to grow and develop because your well-being is good, your spirituality is good, your body is good, right? Then it's no longer an issue. It's just simply a matter of once you come into, you only have to master something once, right? So money is something that you are just set out to master. Once you do it, it's done forever, right? This is why people who attract or create their first millions of dollars and they lose it right away, right? They're able to make the money again. They're able to make more and more millions of dollars because the skill of making money is something that they mastered. They figured it out once, and therefore they can just continue to move on and continue to create that money. So this is all about changing your mindset. And then once you change your mindset and align with whatever it is that you desire to experience, then how you think about money will be of support to you. Okay. So when you know why every dollar moves, right? Money responds with clarity, right? It responds with a sense of understanding, purpose, right? And invites more currency, right? This is what we're talking about. So recognize, take into consideration all these things. I hope you took notes, okay? Because these terminologies and the way you think about money has made a big shift in me, okay? And how I see money, how I feel about money, how I attract more and more money, okay? And as I come into these understandings as far as money goes, I'm sharing them with you, okay? So I'm sharing with you my journey as well. This is not just something that I'm just like saying to you, I am doing it, right? So we're on this journey together, right? So feel free, go to Future Self, right? FutureSelfFrequency.com. I invite you to go there now, put in your email address. I'm offering you a series of gifts called the Future Self Starter Kit. Get that now, okay? And that's going to help you to start expanding your understanding and how you can align with the version of you that has it all. Thank you so much. Peace and abundance always.